My name's Neil Burridge. Welcome to my sword corner. Over the last 20 years I've made a lot of these, I've seen a lot of swords in museums and I've learned a lot, and I'd like to share it with you. Welcome to another video. It's been a couple of weeks and I've been away, and I went to see an amazing Bronze Age hoard called the Bourton Malaby hoard, and it's about 350 pieces of bronze belonging to a group of metalwork called the Carp's Tongue Ewart Park phase, and it's cross-channel scrap, some of it. So some of the items in the hoard are very unusual and would be found in France and Brittany as well as in Kent. So how they were traded and carried across the channel is something that probably show up in later years, but it's quite an interesting connection between things. So another 20 or so swords to my pile of swords I've seen. So today we're going to look at early Bronze Age daggers, because they're an art form and I don't think they're truly appreciated. It's always where I say the sword has always been in the idea of the sword has always been in the human psyche, but having the materials to create it takes a long time. So from the earliest copper daggers in this country through to the first bronze daggers, and then they develop into quite a sophisticated art form that kind of carries through to the first dirk or dirks, and some of the traditions and the artistry carries through to that point. After that, all decoration on blades starts to diminish and it becomes less and less common. By the time swords have developed, decoration is down to literally a few lines, an occasional small bit of marquetry, some on spears, but it is kind of disappears. But the early Bronze Age stuff is probably the most interesting. And if you think, I'm going to hold up, it's basically metalworking in the Stone Age when it first starts, and the first sort of grave to produce interesting stuff was the Amesbury Archer, and I think he's around 2,400 and something, around that mark, and he had 3 copper blades, and this is probably the smallest one, which I've happen to have with me, and to me it's kind of interesting because it's still a functional tool even though it's so small. The analysis on the copper said it come from the Pyrenees Mountains or the south of France, which is incredible. So he's the first person with metalwork. It's the first person, or one of the first persons, jumping the gun there, and one of the first persons to be buried with the tools, polished hammerstone, and the gold work as well. So it's a very important grave. It's also one of the richest graves from that time. Staggering value of grave goods in it, with I think some staggering number of pots in his grave, lots of archery equipment, 2 wrist guards. So whoever he was incredibly important and very powerful, and when he died his grave reflects this. The analysis of him shows that he didn't come from the plains of Wiltshire, and he probably grew up somewhere in the northern Rhine area of Europe, if I remember right, and this is quite a common theme amongst the early Bronze Age graves, the beaker graves, with the pottery. Usually after that you have maybe a few flint tools, maybe a button, maybe a pot, not vast wealth, but the Amesbury Archer, which is displayed at Salisbury Museum, and I recommend it. It's definitely worth going to see. It puts early metalworking on the map, and in a way, the largest dagger, I think, in 3 blades is still tiny in comparison, but it's still there. It's that status symbol of small blades. Metal is status, and the craftsmanship develops. So we're going to look at it over here. The blades are tiny. There's 3 of them, and the longest one is only about this long. This one, because it's quite decayed, I have a feeling it might have only had 1 edge, which makes it more practical. What it was used for, no idea. All that's preserved on the handle is the line across the metalwork. The edges are probably hardened, as in all metalwork is, and the handle is pure conjecture. It could have been made of something else, not wood. But if it was antler or bone, there's a good chance it would have left some kind of trace and been visible. The next blade I want to look at is huge in comparison. This one's in Wiltshire, and it's in the what used to be the Devizes Museum. I think it's called the Wiltshire Heritage Museum now. And it's Wilsford G8 barrow. There's lots of names and numbers to these. I find it quite fascinating. Again, the handle line is preserved, but no handle exists. So usually they're sort of fairly ergonomic, and there's no pommel material. So I have no idea what it was. I think it's wood. I think because they're all buried in chalk, the preservation is very high. And usually bone or antler tends to survive a lot better than wood. So, but anyway, that's the bottom line of the handle. The edges on it were all fully hardened and hammered. I was very lucky that the curator, I think it was Paul Wilkinson at the time, was a very open curator, and he said, "Oh, do you want to look at it?" And I said, "Oh, yes, please." And he got the blade out the case, and with gloves on, you could run your finger down it. And the thing that struck me was how perfect it was. A perfect even taper getting thicker towards the handle. The edges were beautifully forged. This is quite an old thing from my collection, and I haven't actually forged the edges because I couldn't at that time. And I don't know if it would survive, and it's had quite a few dents and bashes, but it is something I'm attached to and don't want to change it. It struck me that all the forging marks from its manufacture had gone. This is in a time where you'd cast a copper ingot, draw the ingot out by hammering with stone tools. Again, we're still doing copper working with stone tools. The hammer's a long way away. And then they've removed all the hammer marks, and they've got all the detail from the hammer has been removed. So the surface is perfect, and then the edges are forged. There's supposed to be something like a 6% arsenic content in the originals, and it's quite a common theme across early metalwork, the arsenic content making the copper very hard. And all in all, it's a very sophisticated piece of copper working, and I would guess that this is almost towards the end of copper working, before the arrival of tin. If you look in the bush barrow grave from the early Bronze Age, there's 2 daggers in there. One's bronze, which is the longer one, and the shorter one is copper. And the copper one has millions and millions of microscopic gold pins decorating what was the handle. It fell apart in the grave when they picked it up, and they only noticed at the very last moment. When I was in the museum, I couldn't see the gold pins, so I asked the curator, I said, where are they? And he said, they're there in front of you. And he said, they're there, look. And they were the size of it's maybe a 3-day beard stubble like me, absolutely microscopic, and each one is a strip of gold cut into a strip, rolled into a round shape by twisting it, and then rolled between two flat surfaces, and then cut to length, and then a head hammered on the end of each one. It's so tiny, I honestly can't imagine how they did it. And there's thousands and thousands of these. So as I was saying, I've brought a piece of gold to show you what could have been done. They're basically making gold sheet and cutting off a tiny slither and picking the slither up, twisting it until it formed a round wire, and then they were rolling it between polished stone surfaces, possibly to stretch it out and make it more uniform and longer. So the scale of it is incredible, and with my eyes it's way beyond it now. So it's quite interesting. The dagger itself, the copper dagger in the bush barrow, which is when you're driving from London along the A30, Stonehenge on your right, the bush barrow is the one with the tree on. The other dagger in there was a very large bronze dagger, and we'll do this in a later film. But the copper dagger that it's buried with is what's called a Moroccan type dagger. So it's got connections with Brittany. And it's also very similar in form to the, as I mentioned before, the copper swords from Spain and Sardinia with the short tang, drawn out ingot forged all the way down to make a sword. But none of that shows up here. Only this one individual American big dagger. But it's still, I think it's a bit longer than this. So what's that? It's about 8 inches. So it's probably about 10 inches long. We might do it in a later video when all your lovely sponsors send me loads of gold. So you get about 300 years of copper working here, and then bronze technology arrives and they start alloying. So we're going to change it to I've just got a casting of this. It's a dagger I did recently, which is the Forcheviot dagger. It's a bronze dagger. It had 1, 2, 3 rivets. We'll insert a picture so you can see it in the film, if that's okay. So you can see it. It had on the handle, it had horn, and I was lucky enough to find horn in black to make the handle. And then it had an antler ring with 3 corrugations in that had a gold foil band over it, and then it had a whale, there's the remnants left of the tooth I used, sperm whale tooth pommel on it, and the contrast of the black horn, the gold, and the white of the tooth and the gold of the bronze was pretty powerful. And it's a theme that's common through the Bronze Age, colour combinations and contrasts through the early Bronze Age. Remember, these graves are the most wealthy and important, powerful people. Also in these graves, you've got to remember that the graves were both men and women. There's equal status at this time, and quite a few of the golden graves around Stonehenge area, called the Golden Graves of Wessex, have ladies in buried with fine thing. Another interesting is the pommel, different pommel materials you get in early Bronze Age. So this one was undecorated and the edges were forged, was about the only addition. And then it was the contrast between the colours through to the pommel. But as I was saying, this theme repeats a lot. So some daggers, not all of them, a few, have amber pommels. There was a beautiful amber pommel in Plymouth from Dartmoor. Sadly was lost during the Second World War, during the Blitz in Plymouth. It was an amber pommel and it had hundreds of gold pins done in a decoration around, 2 rows round the side and 2 diagonal lines across the top. So I've been looking for an amber that would sort of show the colour of the gold pins off, because if it's very yellow it wouldn't show. So that's another project I've got to go in the future. So the amber pommels, there's gold pommels, amber pommels. Majority of pommels are either bone or antler, and the wooden ones just don't survive. So, and as I was saying earlier, with the some of the ladies' graves actually had daggers, and some of them were very small, and it's almost like the dagger was a symbol of your status. It didn't have to be a functional dagger, it could be the token of a dagger. And there's even a tiny halberd in one grave with gold bands, and it's only it's less than 2 inches in all, as a pendant. So it's got a bronze blade, an amber handle, and gold bands, about 4 decorated gold bands. And there's an exact mimic of it in gold and bronze as well. All of these are in the, not the Carnoustie, but the Wiltshire ones are in either Devizes Museum or Salisbury Museum. The metalwork develops in many ways, but it still represents... Right, I'll go on to here, just for a laugh, just to make it more interesting. The metalwork develops to an extraordinary level, and when you try and copy it, it's quite a learning curve. So if we look at something like this dagger, it's got quite a few of the classic traits. One is the crosshatch decoration with rows of dots. There's quite a few. Say there's like 200 daggers. There's probably about 20 of them have cross-hatching. The parallel line things is probably, out of the 200, it probably turns up on 140, 150. Very common, the parallel line decoration. They're all edge forged, and some of them are double edge forged as well. I think it's whatever took the spirit of the bronze worker on the day. And it's quite interesting. So we'll have a look down here in front of the camera so you can have a closer look. So as I was saying earlier, the cross-hatching is, there's a good number of daggers, and the one with the amber pommel in Dartmoor had the cross-hatching. Unfortunately, the dagger was very decayed, and only the middle section of cross-hatching about here survived. So, and I reconstructed it for a visitor centre in Dartmoor, and it's really hard to figure out the size from the drawings and that, so I did my best. All daggers are edge forged, and some of them are double edge forged, and that's quite hard to do. But some of them are tapered edge forged, so it gets wider and wider and wider towards the end, and that is really, really hard to do, and it makes me wonder how they do it sometimes. Remember, we're still looking at stone tools working bronze. So this is before the age of the metal hammer by a long way. The lines generally follow the edge of the blade, and they're usually very equally spaced and beautifully parallel, and they usually turn in at the end or meet up. Sometimes the lines turn out up the top here, but most times they aim for the rivet hole. Rivet holes in bronze daggers can be 6, 5, 4, 3, or even just 2. They vary a lot, but there seems to be common traits. So, but one thing that's always struck me about them is that they are exquisite. They are beautifully executed and huge skill level to make them. I think quite often this passes most people by because they're small, they're green, a bit corroded, and things stick to them, and they don't really grab your attention when you're looking through the cases. But on closer examination, I found them absolutely fascinating. They were producing this stuff from about 2000 BC, when Stonehenge had reached its sort of peak of use, and this is when you get the daggers and the axes carved on Stonehenge. They're Araton down type, which is this sort of period. The daggers are carved with handles, blade pointing down, and the axes are carved as if they're held between two fingers with the blades pointing up. But that's another video. Very interesting. When you hold an axe between your fingers and you tap it, it rings quite harmonically, but I haven't got one here, but we'll sort that out in a later film. There are variations in the daggers. We're going to look at this one. This one was actually a gift from a friend who I taught how to do the basics in bronze casting, and became a very good caster himself in the Netherlands, Jeroen. He sent me this as a thank you, but I quite like it, and it's a nice little illustration about raised lines on some of the daggers. They're not so common where the lines are cast raised. There's more in Scotland, and quite a few of these will have the gold band on the handle like this. And if I do a quick bit of nonsense, they're quite often corrugated, but they use a form underneath to corrugate them. It didn't work. Yeah, it's a bit rubbish. Yeah, the special effects are not very good. But it is quite kind of a nice illustration. The fact they're raised, they obviously meant something. And when they get into this, I kind of think they're definitely cast in stone moulds that are able to produce such clean detail on the lines. There's not a lot of mould material from this time, so you're basically still looking at stone moulds, but they're rare. They don't turn up a lot. Another dagger I want to look at, these are only models. Get the shiny side up. This is one I made ages ago, so, but it kind of gives you an idea of the handle. On the original one, and I can't remember which one it is, the handle line is preserved. So you've got this beautiful little curve out here around. This is not very accurate, this middle bit. The lines are put in and the edges are forged. I mean, this was my work about 15 years ago. So I've left the rivets removable on this because it was for film. And it gives you an idea of the pommel as well. So between the antler pommel that survives and the print of the wood onto the bronze, because the tannic acid in the oak causes the copper to corrode and pickle the surface of the wood in contact, and it preserves. So after that, it's kind of ergonomic. It must be something like this. Another unusual form of decoration is tiny rows of holes, and the holes go all the way through and leave the print on the actual surface of the bronze, and you wonder why. There's nothing in them that's obvious, but they've put the holes through all the way through the wood to there, so that's quite interesting. I'll just turn it round so you can see the pommel held on by pins. The pommel on the FUGA dagger was held on with a wooden pin, which is quite interesting. It was just one wooden pin went through as far as they could tell. So it's a nice little contrast. So this has got 3 pins. We'll try looking at another couple of forms. So these are only wood models I use for casting. They're 2 different blade forms. The blade forms are many, but I've showed you the main ones, and they vary from region to region. So this is when you go to Stonehenge Visitor Centre, there's the original from Shaftesbury grave, and this is the model I used to make it. And I can't remember what the pommel was on that one. And this is another type as well. I think there is several wooden models that have turned up, but I have never seen them close up, so I couldn't really tell. So it gives you an idea of the varied of blade forms. The last thing I'm going to look at is some decoration. We looked at this in an earlier film. It's a dirk, so it's from later, probably, I'm guessing, around 1400 BC. So it's beyond the end of the early Bronze Age. But it's the decoration I wanted to show you. This still turns up on early Bronze Age daggers. Very few, and it's probably originally inspired by imports of blades coming in. I just wanted to show you the cross-hatching. This is kind of the last of the highly decorated blades into the period of dirks in the Middle Bronze Age, or the beginning of the Middle Bronze Age. So again, everything's carried through: the line forging, the double forging, the line, parallel line decoration, and this, and then it kind of fades. It drifts away. There's not highly decorated rapiers, and swords tend to have very muted decoration. So I just thought it was an interesting one to see. This is another one of Jess's very beautiful scabbards. Just for a laugh, we mimicked it here, the decoration on the blade on the end of the scabbard, to make it interesting. So it's a sort of journey through the early Bronze Age. If you want to follow it through, probably the best book to get, product endorsement, is this one. You should be able to find it quite easily on the internet. You might have to hunt for a second-hand copy now. And it just opens up the wonderful world of the early Bronze Age, of beautiful decorations in gold and amber. The consumption of amber in early Bronze Age is not rivaled until the arrival of the Saxons. It's incredible. Huge amber necklaces, gold neck rings or lunarly. It's just an incredible time. It's almost like the time of the early Bronze Age is almost like a Troy that nobody ever knew, and it's definitely worth looking up and learning about the artifacts. Salisbury Museum, Wiltshire Heritage, what used to be Devises Museum, highly recommended. They have absolutely amazing collections, so get out there. Museums need you to come and see their collections. They need you to walk through the door. It's no good looking at it online. You need to visit them. Anyway, thank you for that. I hope I'm been too long. Thank you. I don't monetize my films. The idea is to share my knowledge with you. So if you want to support me, you can buy me a cup of coffee in the link below, and if you could like, share and hit the subscribe button, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. This channel has serious product endorsements. We could put that at the end.
Sure, yeah.